Yo, what's cracking, folks? Welcome to episode 18 of the Painter The Pixie.
So cool.
I am your host, Jeremy Vassar, and I am joined by your other lovely host, Serina.
Hi, everybody.
And so in this episode of the podcast, we are talking all about digestion. I should probably just let Serina explain what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, we just chatted about digestion. You know, it's a common question. It's a common educational component that I give to all of my new clients and people, pretty much anybody who I talk to. So I thought it'd be really fun to have a conversation here with Jeremy about how digestion works. Some common areas where digestion is maybe not working as well, and some really easy tips that you can do to kind of help improve digestion on your own without the need of a health professional.
So, and that is what we pretty much talked about that the whole time.
Yep.
So it was very enlightening for me as well. And you know, I haven't heard your whole spiel in a while, so it was very good. You really know your stuff.
Thank you.
So without further ado, please enjoy episode number 18 of the Painter and the Pixie.
This is only the beginning.
All right, ready?
Ready?
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Well, I don't believe it.
Let's find out. Ready, set, go.
Ooh, buddy, what's up, girl?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Tell me all about digestion.
Okay, jump right into it.
There's an intro. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll be good. So
Treat me like a client.
yeah, so today I really wanted to spend some time talking about how digestion works. I had a new client recently who listens to our show, and she was like, she knew so much just by listening to the resources we have available here on the Painter and the Pixie. So I thought, how cool would it be if I could offer people who wanted to listen and learn about digestion just from our show? So then you were like, well, why don't we talk about it? I was like, yes, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actionable intelligence.
Actionable intelligence.
Yeah. Online, you know, digital assets and so forth.
Yeah, offering value.
Well, yeah, added value,
Yeah.
things of that nature, resources, all those good things.
Yeah. that's
Beer,
good.
it's good.
Beer, yeah, you know, so we'll talk about how that affects digestion too in a little bit.
In an awesome, awesome way.
I thought you were going to say in an awesome glass.
Oh, it is.
Because it's such a giant glass.
It's wonderful.
I feel like it's like
Jeremy-sized glass.
yeah, it's like when you eat one of those giant turkey legs, only it's a glass.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Mm-hmm. You can fit two in here, folks.
Yeah.
That's the jam.
Yeah, so what are you drinking, actually?
All Day IPA by Founders.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
I believe it's Founders is in PA. Mm-hmm. So they're one of the many quality breweries in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So
pretty good.
highly recommend it. And you definitely can drink this stuff all day. So lives up to the name.
Good to know.
Yeah, we're cruising right through this case.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So digestion.
Digestion.
Yeah, this is going to be a little bit more Serina focused on the moment for this show, but that's all right. I want you to be totally engaged too.
It's all right. I'm just the like the color commentator. I'll just spice it up.
Yes. So digestion is one of the topics that I am super, super passionate about. I talk about it every single day, and especially in my office, because people come to me. I'm a nutritional therapist, for those of you who might be new to this episode, and people come to me for all kinds of widespread variety of issues, ranging anywhere from like thyroid problems, autoimmune conditions, weight loss, weight gain, Lyme disease, whatever it is, all kinds of things. And whatever I do, the very, 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 very first thing that I do is say, how's your digestion? Where do we need to optimize digestion? How can we help improve this? Why? Because digestion is so important. Mm-hmm. So the big idea here that we're going to jump off with is that digestion works from north to south. Okay?
Got it.
So digestion, I'll ask you this, and I know you've heard this before. So if I were to ask you, where does digestion begin? Where do you think it would begin?
Deep in your thoughts.
Deep in your thoughts.
In your
yes.
brain.
Yes, in your brain. And you've heard this before, so you're totally...
I think I've actually known that prior to knowing you.
Wow, impressive. Good for you.
Because I know, it's a Pavlovian experiment was the dogs would start salivating when they associated a dinner bell with getting fed food. Mm-hmm. So I know as soon as you start thinking about food, you start salivating and are anticipating the mastication process.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly
I know
right.
some stuff.
I know you
I know
do.
some
It's
stuff.
Great. It's nice. So digestion, most people think digestion begins in the mouth or in the stomach. And I'll say most of the people who've come into my office, maybe 2 or 3 people have said in the brain, because true physical chemical digestion does begin in the mouth and the stomach, but the digestive process really truly begins in the brain. You have to be in what's called a parasympathetic state in order to digest your food. So what does parasympathetic mean? Our bodies operate with our autonomic nervous system, right? And our autonomic nervous system is the part of our brain that automatically takes care of all of the stuff we don't ever have to think about, right? Heartbeat, fingernails grow, all these things that we're not consciously aware of. Our autonomic nervous system automatically takes care of it. Well, our ANS operates in 2 modes, go mode and rest mode. Go mode is called sympathetic. Rest mode is parasympathetic. Now, go mode, for those of you who might be familiar with the term fight or flight, the extreme end of go mode is fight or flight mode. And then we call parasympathetic rest mode, we call that rest and digest. So you can only digest food when your brain is in a parasympathetic state.
So when you're chilling.
Yeah, if you're walking around, if you're, driving around in the car, if you're standing up, which a lot of us do, right? We live in a culture that's go, go, go all the time. Especially if you have kids, you're just eating and trying to get them out the door and you rush.
For sure. Yeah.
You're super in go mode.
In the car is an interesting one because technically you're sitting down, but particularly if you're driving. Like if you're parked somewhere and you're resting, like I see a lot of people around, like they'll drive to a park and have their lunch in their car in a park. That's fine. But if you're on the road, particularly on the highway, driving like 70 miles an hour and shoving cheeseburgers in your face, you're not giving your body the best chance to digest that well because you're so ramped up from traveling at that speed.
You're in go mode.
Right.
And you should be. You want to be in go mode when you're driving. Even if you're only driving 25 miles per hour, 15 miles per hour in a school zone, you're in go mode. Your brain is constantly scanning for threats or possibilities. So you're definitely not in rest and digest mode. But like you said too, nice qualification there. If you're just a passenger and you're sitting in the car, that is a different situation.
Is it?
It can be. If you're just sitting there.
Well, I guess because you're not the one in control, so you could probably be more restful. I would just be curious because you would know you're traveling at speed. You're still being
stimulated.
I would just be curious. I would imagine being completely still and not traveling at 50 miles an hour would be more conducive to good digestion than. But yeah, I never really thought about it. But yeah. I guess it would be. You definitely would digest better than the driver.
Right. You'd be digesting better than the driver.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So when we are in rest mode, parasympathetic state, our body has the proper tools to say, okay, digestion is going to happen. This is what we're going to do. So a lot of people come to me and have, like I said, all kinds of different issues. And the first thing I do is say, let's talk about digestion. Are you sitting down when you eat your food? You kind of alluded to this too. Sitting in your car is totally fine to sit in your car when you eat. But if you're in go mode, you're doing things, you're driving that car, I would say probably not the best time to eat.
Right.
Then when you sit down, that really helps to keep your brain in a parasympathetic state. So I guess I'm going to come back around to that. I'm going to talk through how digestion works, and then we'll talk through some components of how do you improve digestion if you're not experiencing optimal digestion. All right. So after your brain, the next part of digestion is in the mouth, right? So in our mouth, we don't really think about this very much, particularly in our culture. We do so much to help food be absorbed appropriately when we are aware of it. If you go to a restaurant, anybody, and try this out sometimes, and just watch people eat food, see how many times they chew their food before they swallow it. I do this sometimes when we go out. It's like 2 or 3 chews and then they swallow it.
What you should? I'm going to give you a pitch counter. Do you know what a pitch counter is?
No, I just know is it a counter? You just push that button?
Yeah, it's like coaches used to wear them on like their middle finger and has a clicker. You just count.
You would as a counter.
I used to pitch back in the day, but you would want to. Coaches would keep track of how many pitches you threw, so you didn't blow your arm out. Oh. But you could bring. I just remember that sound distinctly, and then it would just rotate the number over.
Yeah, perfect.
Just bring that to like an Olive Garden. Just
Yeah, and I really think that's why Americans need such large quantities of food at their servings, because the only time people taste their food is the little tiny bits that they're chewing it. If you chewed your food really, really well, you could do well with a much smaller amount of food and feel great.
And now, how many times are you saying to chew?
Now, generally people will chew between 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 bites or 6 chews per bite. But ideally, you want to chew between 20 and 30 times per bite. Per bite.
So many.
Even salad.
Well, salad you have to.
Man, some people don't.
I just feel like there's a lot of crunchy stuff in there that you need to like.
Do you chew your
pulverize.
salad 20 to 30 times per bite?
I don't eat a lot of salad because I do smoothies.
Do you chew your smoothies 20 to 30 times per
No,
bite?
I just suck it straight down.
Yeah, well, ideally, if you want digestion to work appropriately, you actually want to mix saliva in with those smoothie sips as well.
But it doesn't taste very good.
That's all right. You still should if you want to have optimized digestion. So why do I say this? What's the big deal with all this chewing? Well, 5 major factors are very important that happen in our body when we chew. 1, we do a physical breakdown of our food, right? Mastication. We chew, we break apart large food particles into smaller food particles. And I'm sorry if this is gross for you people, if anybody has ever seen pieces of, quote, undigested food in their stool, a lot of times that has nothing to do with actual digestion. It has to do whether or not you've chewed your food well enough.
She's talking about poop for people,
I
the
am.
uninitiated. Yeah.
Yeah, I do talk about poop all the time, so you'll get used to it.
Everybody poops.
Everybody poops. And your
fine.
poop tells you a lot about what's going on in your body. So if you learn to see what it's saying, you can, grow. You can learn some new things, help yourself out.
Yeah.
So I love saying this, our digestive tract only has one set of teeth, and that's in our mouth, not anywhere else.
Right. Okay.
So if we don't chew our food well here in the mouth, it's not going to be broken down almost anymore, anywhere else. So it physically breaks down our food. Our saliva has digestive enzymes which begin chemically breaking down our food. That's why I said that about your smoothie. If you don't mix saliva in with your food well enough, then you're not going to trigger some later parts of digestion down south, right? So physical breakdown, chemical breakdown. When you taste food by chewing it really well, you give your brain almost like a list. Here are the nutrients in this food. Our taste buds not only tell us how food tastes, but they tell our brains, here's the nutrient profile within this food. So that does a couple of things for us. We'll tell our brain, okay, we've got all the nutrients we need. We're full. Helps you to trigger proper satiation. And it also, number 4, tells your stomach, hey, food is on the way. Create enough stomach acid to digest this food.
Interesting. So by properly chewing your food, you're saying you're giving your brain and your stomach the most accurate account of like what kind of calories you're putting into your body, like composition of like protein, fat, carbohydrate.
Yes.
So your brain knows, okay, this is what's coming in. I know how much acid to produce, and I also know like when we've got enough of that.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a great summary. So it helps you to maintain good portion control. Right? I talk about this all the time, listening to your body. Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. That only works if you're properly being triggered, I'm full.
Right.
Right?
And I've heard that that's true for like sometimes your brain needs, it has like a little bit of a lag
It does.
in it. And when you eat super fast, you're almost like overriding that full signal. And by the time that signal hits your dome, you've eaten like way, way, way too much.
Yeah.
Versus if you've given enough time and eaten slowly, that you're giving your brain that chance to receive the signal and be like, okay, we're all set. You can stop stuffing your face.
Yep.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Okay.
If you ever heard or if you ever said my eyes were bigger than my stomach,
Yeah.
that's the concept that you're talking about. You wanted this big, huge plate. You ate it really fast. You're so full. You're physically full capacity in the stomach. But sometimes you still say, oh, well, I just need that little bit of sweet, right? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah.
Like a sweet treat at the end of the meal.
Yeah. Dessert.
Dessert, right? Even though you're physically full, your brain is telling you, I still need more because it didn't have a chance to register the food that you swallowed.
Right. And then you're also, and if you didn't chew it properly, you're interfering with that almost volume counter even
Yeah,
more.
correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Correct.
I never really thought about it like that.
Yep. And then the last part of digestion, the last thing that the chewing our food does for us is it tells the stomach, which I think I just talked about this, I missed one somewhere, tells the stomach to create the proper amount of acids and enzymes and digestive juices required for that bite of food.
Okay.
Yes. So then once we chew up our food really, really well, we swallow it and it goes down into the stomach. And what should happen if we are in a calm parasympathetic state, if we've chewed our food really well, we should have a wonderful big vat of acid waiting for that food to be dissolved and disintegrated and digested in the stomach.
Like a nice welcome party.
Yeah, like a nice welcome party. If we don't chew our food well, if we're not in a parasympathetic state, if we're not calm when we eat our food, it is very likely that we're not going to have enough acid in the stomach to break down food properly, right?
Okay.
So I like to give this word picture. Imagine if you had a meal. Can you pick a meal?
Do you want like a healthy
Healthy
meal?
or unhealthy, any meal.
Let's do Caesar salad, steak, loaded baked potato, and a side of broccoli.
Okay, hey, that's a good meal.
Yeah.
So now imagine taking all of those foods and whizzing them up in a blender
Okay.
and then spitting in the blender and then letting that blender sit on the counter for like a week. What's
Okay.
going to happen?
This is going to be pretty
It's
gnarly.
going to be pretty gnarly. It's going to be so gross, right? Like, that is what happens in our stomachs when we don't chew our food well and when we don't have proper stomach acid. Like maybe we've got a little bit of saliva going on in there, but it's
Right.
going to sit. It's not going to get digested.
I like the image of spitting in the
Yeah,
blender.
right?
That's good. I like that.
Now imagine that same meal.
Okay.
Same process,
Yeah.
with or without the spit. And dumping, instead of leaving it sit on the counter, dumping that blender full of food into a bucket of acid.
Okay.
What's going to happen?
It gets dissolved.
It's going to be dissolved. It's going to be disintegrated. Disintegrated. It's going to be broken down into tiny little particles. Very easy to move on through the rest of digestion. It's not going to be rancid or rotting sitting on that counter. It's going to actually be digested.
Okay.
That's what we want to have happen essentially in our stomachs. When we eat food, have a big vat of acid waiting to be able to break down all of our food.
Now I have this might be a stupid question, but when the food, let's just assume that you've done things correctly. So you've chewed it 20 to 30 times. It is well pureed and it's now drops down your esophagus into the stomach. Do the nutrients get pulled out in the stomach, or does the stomach just break things down and then move it into the small intestine for then the nutrients to get pulled out of?
Yeah, good question. That is a really good question. Most nutrients get absorbed in the small intestines.
Okay.
The stomach is kind of a holding area. Some do get absorbed in the stomach, but almost all of them are in the small intestines. The stomach is more like a holding area to continue the breakdown of your food so that it can be absorbed.
Okay, because so the stomach's function primarily is to break the food particles down smaller so that the small intestine can break them down or can absorb them.
Yep.
And then it goes small intestine to large intestine.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Cool. Sorry.
got it.
I'm trying to jump
No,
ahead
that's
here.
okay. That's a very good question.
Yeah.
So the stomach is a muscle, right? It's like a little bag. And I like to call this the churn and burn. So your stomach doesn't have teeth, but it's a muscle. So once you've got food and saliva and digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid all mixed in, the stomach's going to kind of massage all of those liquids in with your foods so that everything is an even level of acid level,
Okay.
right? So that enzymes and acids are mixed thoroughly throughout evenly. Then when you reach the proper level of acid in the stomach, now I'm going to take a break for a second. Are you familiar with the pH scale?
I am. I actually did in Project Science, 8th and 9th grade. I pretty much did the same experiment 2 years in a row because it was a stupid class. But it's the whole grade was this project.
Yeah.
And I tested antacids.
Oh.
So I actually
Wow.
I actually simulated my own stomach acid.
That's
and
cool.
I did a lot with pH. And then the first year I put like cooked meat in there and then would test pH. And then I would use Tums and I had like Zantac, is that one of them? Yeah. So I tested all of them and saw their effect on pH.
Wow.
And then the following year, I actually had a stomach simulator,
wow.
and it was a
That's so
it was a
spiffy.
churner, and it would plunge the meat in,
Agitate the meat,
Yeah,
right?
it was an
Like mix it
agitator. It was an agitator. So it was like a piston that just went over and over again in these beakers, and then that took so long, I just made up all the results. So.
That's funny.
Because it's a stupid course. And shout out to Mr. Rissinger. Totally passed that class
That's
with an
so
A.
funny.
So
That's good. Made up all
anyway,
the results.
got an honorable mention at the science fair. So
Wow.
it's pretty solid.
That's cool. Well, I wonder if you had chewed that meat up first, if it would have digested faster in your stomach acid.
I'm not sure. It was
You know,
it was
because-
ground beef, but I didn't think to chew it. I
Yeah,
just
right.
but honestly, it was probably a good representation of like someone who got stomach problems because
Yeah.
it was like relatively unchewed. And
Yeah.
if you just like gobble down a cheeseburger, it's just going to be like chunks of meat anyway.
Yep,
But-
exactly.
But yeah, my results were completely erroneous.
Yeah,
so.
you're like, they're totally made up anyway. So
Yeah, yeah.
So you are familiar with the pH scale. Basically, essentially, one extreme of the pH scale is very, very acidic. The other side of the pH scale is the opposite, which is called alkaline
Yeah.
or base. So
And how do the numbers go?
it goes from 0
Okay.
to 14.
And then-
0 is pure acid and 14 is pure alkaline, pure
Okay.
base.
Okay.
As 7, which is the middle of the pH scale, is totally neutral, not acidic or alkaline.
I used to also have to do pH tests when I worked at Lakeside, and I was the pool guy.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to like make sure all the chemicals were even, Steven. So
Yep.
we had to do a pH test to see if we had to add any chlorine, or if it was like too much, we'd have to add something else to like balance it out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my experience with the pH.
Cool.
scale.
Awesome. Hey, that's more than most.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. So basically the stomach, when you're eating food and digesting a food, your stomach level of pH should be anywhere between a 1.5 and 3.
Okay.
It's almost a pure acid.
Yeah.
That is so insanely acidic. But our stomachs are designed to handle that. We have this wonderful mucosal lining that goes inside the stomach so that it protects the stomach wall itself from the acid.
Okay.
But if we have digestive compromise, if we're not calm, if we don't chew our food well, if we have a lot of high stress, if we drink certain types of beverages, carbonated beverages can decrease the lining in the stomach.
Is that how you get ulcers?
And you can get ulcers.
And then what exactly is an ulcer? Is that when the acid breaches the mucus?
Goes
wall?
past the mucus and burns the wall of the stomach.
Interesting.
Yep, that's
okay.
an ulcer.
And then you get like a sore where
Yep.
it's breached. Okay.
Yep. It's like if you've ever had like a blister,
Right.
kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
or if you've ever burned your hand on an oven. That's what happens
So it's
inside your
it's
stomach.
like an acid burn.
It is.
Okay.
Yep, that's what an ulcer is.
Okay.
Yep. So anyway, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I'm going to keep talking about how digestion is supposed to work.
Sorry, I had questions. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. It's very good questions. I love it. So you should have really, really, really acidic stomach. Once the food is properly acidified, it reaches somewhere between that 1.5 to 3 level. That is what triggers the valve at your bottom of your stomach to open. Otherwise, that valve, which is called the pyloric valve, stays closed. If that valve stays closed, your food sits in your stomach. So if any of you listening have ever experienced the food baby or bloating after your meals, very likely things are not passing through appropriately. Very likely there's a level of not enough acid in the stomach to trigger that valve to open.
Okay. What's the valve at the top of the stomach?
That's called your cardiac sphincter.
Okay. And that stops acid from coming up.
It does not stop
It does
acid
not.
from coming
Okay.
up. Correct. So I'll come back to this now then.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, we're talking about the stomach. So
Yeah.
when you have digestive malfunction or compromise, I don't even like to call it malfunction, but compromise, things aren't working optimally, then you have symptom, right? And your symptoms could be bloating, could be belching, could be gas, could be a feeling of like a rock sitting in your stomach. It could be heartburn or indigestion or acid reflux. All of those things, almost all of them, often are related to low stomach acid. Now that valve at the top of your stomach / bottom of your esophagus, the cardiac sphincter, is not really a valve as much as a flap, kind of.
Okay.
And that's the only valve in your entire digestive tract that opens both north and south so that you have the physical capacity to vomit if needed.
Right.
Right? So if you have food in the stomach that you've chewed, just like that first blender sitting on the counter for a week, food that just sits there and it starts to rot, there's not enough acid to do digestion, then that food is going to be heavier, right, than the liquid. It's going to sink to the bottom, and the little bit of acid you do produce floats up to the top. Now that cardiac sphincter does not stay closed. It does allow food and liquid to move back up into the esophagus, and that is how you experience heartburn.
So then and a lot of times people have it when they lay back down.
Mm-hmm.
So then that sphincter will open back up, and then the acid
Yep.
will creep back up your throat, and that's what you're experiencing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep. So a lot of people think and have been told, it's a little bit incorrectly by a lot of modern medical professionals, that when you have heartburn, you have too much acid in your stomach. That is true to a point, but on the whole, not the entire picture. It is too much acid in your esophagus. Your esophagus does not have a protective mucosal lining like your stomach does. So any small amount of acid in the esophagus is too much. Right?
Right.
But most of the time, how does that acid get to the esophagus? Because there's not enough acid in the stomach to move it down south into the small intestines.
That would be counterintuitive for a lot of folks,
It is counterintuitive to a lot of folks.
because you're taking acid blockers and all of those things to
Yep.
try and like even Tums and stuff. A lot of it, if I remember my experiments correctly, would alter the pH of the acid in the stomach
Correct.
to be milder. It made
Yes.
them more alkaline, but that's actually most of the time not what you need.
Most of the time, that's not what you need. There are rare circumstances where you actually need less acid, and that has to do with recovering from an ulcer. Or if you've had some other type of injury, and that's why they invented things like Zantac. That's called a PPI, proton pump inhibitor. Proton pumps are the cells in the stomach that secrete stomach acid. So if you have something that's inhibiting them, then they're not going to secrete acid. So you essentially solve the symptom of heartburn, but you perpetuate the problem.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So improving that digestive process, remaining calm. When you're calm, parasympathetic, when you chew your food well, you help the body, the stomach, to stimulate the proper level of acid production, right? So sometimes people who have heartburn, all they have to do is sit down and chew their food and it goes away,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because they've set their body up for success to move digestion from north to south.
And you've given your brain and your stomach the proper level of input to create the right amount of acid
Yep.
to deal with the amount of food that you're intaking.
Yep, exactly. If your mother or your grandmother ever said to you, sit down and chew your food,
Yeah.
she was right.
And my mom always got on me for not
I
chewing.
still get on you for that.
Well, my dad is a very fast eater, and that came from his family where his dad was one of 12, and they lived on a farm. There was very little food, and they had to go hunt for their food a lot of the time. So it was kind of like feast or famine. And then when the food hit the table, it was like a brawl. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just locusts just going, and you had to get it and throw it down your face as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So
But you don't have to do that. You're one of two.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
That's just where it's it used to be, you're just like, "Rah."
Yeah. And these are long-standing habits. A lot of people have these habits, but the beautiful thing about habits is you can change them.
Right.
It takes time. And all I'm saying is take steps in the right direction. Maybe if you chew your food 5 times right now, chew 10 times next time. You know what I mean? Little steps moving in the right direction.
And then one of the things that I find too is that if I've prepared a meal and spent a lot of time and energy and love preparing something, even if it's one of my like more epic cheat meals, I will sit down and really chew my food and enjoy it. And then that's something that my mother's really good at. Like when
yeah,
she
for
has
sure.
when
She's
she
really good
has
at that.
food or a treat or whatever it is, she's giving her body the best chance possible to digest it well.
Yep.
So, and
Absolutely.
that's instead of just like, in an office environment, you just grab a handful of M&Ms and chuck them down your face and be like,
You walk past the candy bowl, you just pop it in your mouth, you keep eating, you're walking or going, you're not at all focused on
right.
digestion.
So you're not giving your body a very good chance to deal with that and partition that fuel well.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, and on note on that, when you are in go mode, your body's capacity to actually produce stomach acid is significantly limited and might completely be hindered entirely.
Right.
So that's why parasympathetic digestion is a parasympathetic process. You need to be in rest mode.
Yep. Chilling.
Chilling. Yep. Chilling, chew your food, enjoy that food. I want to touch on what you said. You spent some time preparing that meal and making this meal. I always talk about this with my clients too. And I think about this almost every time I eat, as many times as I can think about it. How long did it take to get that food to your plate? Like from growing or grazing on the grass to your plate. A very long time, sometimes years, right? If you're eating beef, how long did that cow have to grow and nourish itself and become the meat that you're eating? And then to the butcher, and then to the farm or to the supermarket or whatever, and then to your plate, your refrigerator. Then you prepare it yourself. I mean, sometimes that's years, and the meal's gone in 10 minutes,
Yeah. Yeah.
5 minutes.
Right.
That is, it is not at all honoring to our body, to our planet, to our culture, right? We've talked a lot in the past. There's a lot of opinions on diets and vegan and vegetarian and all these things, and I'm not going to get into any of that. But I think the one thing that most people can agree upon is that we want to be honoring to the system,
Right.
to our
right.
bodies, to the
Yeah,
animals.
Absolutely.
And if we eat it in 5 minutes, how is that at all helpful,
Yeah.
right?
So, and I also think what's interesting is that we've established that digestion starts in the mind.
Yes.
And a lot of companies know this, which is why they will, like if you've ever gone by like an Outback Steakhouse or McDonald's and you smell that French fry smell or whatever fry oil they have, you're like, your brain's like, ooh. But it's also
You
true.
salivate sometimes.
It's also true in your house when you make a really, like we make a lot of bacon in
Yeah.
this house. You start making bacon, it's like, ooh, yeah. And your
So
brain's
good.
like, oh man. And like, it's definitely triggering that process. And that's all part of it is the smells and the sensations that go along with a meal. And that's really where you can, that preparing food, you get to smell it along the way, and that's a good way to also prep your brain for all the deliciousness it's about to enjoy.
Absolutely.
So
helps you to be you're in go mode, but it helps your body to shift down into, we're going to go into parasympathetic mode hardcore when we sit down
right.
and can eat that meal.
Yeah.
Another tip while we're still talking about this part of digestion, if you're trying to become more conscious about how many times you're chewing your food and you're wanting to improve your ability to chew more thoroughly per bite, I highly recommend putting your fork down per bite, between bites.
Ooh, okay.
Put your fork down, put your spoon down, whatever utensil, chopsticks, take a bite, put the fork down, put your hands back in your lap or off the table. Don't keep holding the fork. Take a moment, chew your food. It's going to help you to actually take more time to chew that food thoroughly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It's a good move.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I like that.
That's a nice tip.
When I pay attention, I will do that.
Yeah.
I try and, it's mainly because you tell me a lot. So.
I know, but it really is. It's quite a difficult habit to break. I just did a vlog on this where I was like, well, you know what, guys? I had to eat my meal in 5 minutes. Some days are like that. That was on Friday.
Yeah, my mom always tells us not to like hunch over the food. Like if it's a bowl, you're just like, you're just hunch, like shoveling it in.
Yeah. I try to tell people too, if you're aiming for an ideal starting point, set aside at least half an hour for every meal.
Okay.
Even if it's just your eggs and bacon in the morning and sauerkraut, eat that for half an hour. As long as sometimes the meal is small enough where you can't do that. But if you're chewing thoroughly and I've got this time to eat, and even if you finish your meal ahead of time, you're still seated, you're still relaxed for that time afterwards, and that significantly can improve digestion.
Yeah. And I can definitely feel that when I give myself enough time to then consume the food and then just hang out for a minute, and then it's like, okay, let's get back to it. That's what we do at work every day too. We give ourselves about 30 minutes.
Yeah, good, awesome,
so
fantastic. So the next part of digestion, once we have been calm, we've chewed our food well, we've got tons and tons of acid, proper levels of acid in the stomach, we move on to the small intestines. And this is where a lot of really fun stuff happens. Actually, before I go into that, I want to talk about ulcers again real quick. I want to come back around. Proton pump inhibitors and acid blockers do serve a purpose. I was kind of bashing them for a bit. They're not useful to repair the problem, the actual underlying factor of why you have heartburn. Most people, I don't want to say every single person, because some people do produce too much acid or acid at the wrong times when you don't have a meal. But those things were designed to help people heal from ulcers. So if you've got an ulcer, if you've got something going on in the stomach, you do need to stop acid production to let it heal. But then most of the time, doctors just leave people on these acid blockers for years and years and years. And I remember I had a client who was on acid blockers for like 20 years and could not have, bowel movement talk again, didn't have a solid bowel movement for 20 years because he was on these acid blockers. And as soon as we got him off of it and we did something called hydrochloric acid therapy together, which is closely monitored way of helping to repair stomach lining and then replenish stomach acid capacity, you know what, wouldn't you know, perfect bowel movements, lost 20 pounds, feels great, has good mental energy, because it turns out you really need stomach acid to be able to absorb your food well and not just pass it through you in an emergency mode.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yep. So now moving on into the small intestines again, the next part of digestion. After you have good acid, that pyloric valve says, come on through. You're totally allowed to pass through. No harm is going to come. You move...
like a third base coach.
Yes, you got it. You can do it. I like to think about it like this too. When you don't have enough acid in the stomach, she just stands there. No, you can't come through.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you pass through into the small intestines.
You shall not pass.
Yes, you shall not pass. You can't, because you're going to cause harm if this partially acidified food moves down south.
It's the Gandalf of your bowels.
Yeah. Pyloric valve, Gandalf. You're going to remember it forever now.
Yeah.
So once food moves from the stomach into the beginning of your small intestines, the beginning of your small intestines is called your duodenum. Some people call it duodenum. I say duodenum because I think duodenum sounds a little weird.
I've only heard it duodenum.
Yeah, it's because you heard it from me.
Okay.
And I say duodenum.
Yeah.
But duodenum, it's not incorrect. It's just a different way of saying it.
Potato.
So once food is in your duodenum, several things happen at once, and it's super exciting. Your pancreas gets involved, and your liver gallbladder gets involved. So your pancreas, we often think, when we hear pancreas, we think things like insulin and diabetes and all of that. Your pancreas is an interesting organ because it is an endocrine gland, meaning it has to do with regulating hormones such as insulin, but it's also an exocrine gland, meaning having to do with digestion. So it secretes and creates additional digestive enzymes, a hormone that triggers the gallbladder to get involved, and my favorite, sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. Did you know?
Yeah.
Your pancreas makes baking soda?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's so cool. So baking soda, bicarbonate, is super, super alkaline. And you mix it with the super, super acidic substance that is your food, which is called chyme. You put that together and you get a neutralized substance.
Oh.
Right? So as soon as that food leaves the stomach, it's neutralized. No more acid.
Okay.
The reason you need it to be super, super acidified in the stomach is just to make sure things are broken down small enough to move into the small intestines.
So then what's the pH of food once it hits the small intestine?
Very close to neutral.
Interesting. Which
Very
would
close
be
to
what,
neutral.
7?
7.
Okay.
Not quite 7, between 7 and 7.2.
Okay.
And that's because your bloodstream, believe it or not, is a very, well, believe it or not, you would know, very, very small window of pH. So it needs to be between 7 and 7.2. If your pH of your blood goes above or below that, you essentially will die instantly. Your
Yeah.
body very, very carefully monitors that.
So not what we're going for.
Not what we're going for. So if your food is not acid enough, it's not going to be triggered to be properly neutralized. Now I'm going to take a step back here and disqualify something I said a moment ago. You shall not pass.
Yeah.
That is true from a chemical reaction perspective, but if you continue to put food in the stomach, you will eventually shove stuff through that pyloric valve. It's just going to force its way through into the small intestines.
Like the bell rug.
Yeah, it's just going to make its way through and there's nothing you can do about it. And oftentimes when that's the case, food has been maybe partially acidified, not properly acidified, and now you have food that's acid in the intestines, not acid enough to trigger the pancreas to neutralize it, so you're just burning your intestines all the way through.
Ooh, what happens there?
People often develop things like ulcerative colitis. A lot of my clients who've been diagnosed with, what's that digestive one that people get all the time?
Irritable bowel?
Irritable bowel. Yes, thank you.
On the first try.
Thank you.
Yes.
Irritable bowel syndrome
Yeah.
is just a collection of, people, they give them that
IBS.
name, IBS, as a collection of symptoms. You have these digestive complaints. Well, I tell you the truth, every single person who's come into my office and who's had a diagnosis of IBS now is completely symptom-free, in my opinion. Okay, you don't have IBS anymore. And all we do is fix digestion. All we do is get that stomach pH level to be properly acidified, and then things can go back to normal. Right? So when you have food that's partially acidified, like I said, you can burn the intestines. You can get things like ulcerative colitis. You can get ulcers. You can get a lot of inflammation. You can get all kinds of things that are unhappy. Or what is very, very common too, chronic diarrhea.
Right. Okay.
People will fluctuate oftentimes between diarrhea and constipation. And the diarrhea, a lot of times your body's like, get this out of me now, especially if you notice this. Like a lot of people don't talk about this stuff, but it's so common. They eat food and within an hour it's in the toilet.
Right.
Because it's partially acidified, but it's a previous meal you've shoved through because it's not moving through correctly. And the intestines go, oh my gosh, holy crap, too much acid. Get it out of here before it does damage.
So they just green light it and
Yeah.
just right out. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. So,
Well, how long, well, you're probably going to get to this. I was just curious, like how long should it take for your meal? Like say you sit down at 12 o'clock, like how long should it take to move on through?
so that is a very widely debated topic. And I will say that the general rule of thumb is somewhere around 6 to 24 hours.
Okay.
So very wide margin, but 1 hour is way too short.
So different strokes for different folks, but probably not an hour.
Well, and different types of food will pass
Right,
through you more
right,
quickly.
right.
So something that's really simple to digest, such as a piece of fruit, an apple, will pass through you much more quickly than a piece of steak. Right?
Gotcha.
So there's a variation there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that because the stomach acid takes longer to get it like neutral?
Well, stomach acid, it will take a longer time for something that is more dense in protein to be digested, like a piece of steak, as opposed to a piece of fruit, which doesn't have any protein, and that's mostly carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are primarily digested with enzymes, so they can go through very quickly.
I gotcha. Because it's pretty much just like carbohydrates and like some fiber and stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So that, and carbohydrates digest very quickly, which we'll talk about on probably
Right.
another episode. I don't think we'll have time today.
Okay.
But anyway, so in the small intestines, we have the pancreas, which has sent out its digestive enzymes and it's neutralizing agent so that now your chyme is just neutralized food paste. And it has also told the liver gallbladder to say, hey, release bile. It secretes a hormone. Pancreas secretes a hormone called cholecystokinin, which is abbreviated CCK. For those of you who are nerdy out there, I have to remember is that gallbladder gets triggered. But CCK tells the gallbladder release bile in the presence of dietary fats. So you have to eat some fat. Most fats do not get digested in the stomach or with enzymes. They need bile. Now, bile is like Dodge soap on grease. It just emulsifies and breaks down those fatty acids into teeny tiny little particles. Were you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I just have. Oh, I was just you said the gallbladder produces bile that breaks down dietary fats.
Yes.
So I would assume that people that have had their gallbladder removed have an issue digesting dietary fats.
Correct. And I'm going to change what you said a minute ago. Your liver creates the bile, not your gallbladder.
Oh, sorry.
The liver creates bile, which is stored in the gallbladder.
Oh, okay. So the gallbladder is like a holding area for the bile that the liver creates.
It's like a water balloon attached to your liver.
Okay. Interesting.
That's how I always like to talk about it. So yes, bile is a substance that we've all probably heard of when we think about like vomiting. You think, oh, it tasted bile. It's so gross.
Yeah.
Right? So the liver creates this wonderful, fantastic substance called bile, which is also sometimes called the river of toxins, because when you detoxify junk, the liver has to get rid of it somehow to pass it out of the body. So it throws that into bile. Bile gets stored up in the gallbladder, which, like I said, is like a little water balloon attached to the liver. And in the presence of dietary fats, as well as that hormone CCK, that water balloon, your gallbladder, squashes out all of its wonderful bile, which then mixes in the duodenum with all the rest of those, digestive enzymes and things to continue breaking down your food. Now, we're going to spend a moment here talking about bile. Bile is so insanely important in the digestive process that people who do have their gallbladders removed often have difficulty digesting dietary fats. The number one protocol, if you've had your gallbladder removed, is eat a very low-fat diet for the rest of your life.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's miserable.
Doesn't sound fun at all.
No, it's not. And we've just come off, thankfully, off of this, decades long low fat craze where people are saying, oh, I guess that's not really the problem. Maybe it's all these processed foods and high amounts of sugar that we've never had in the history of mankind that's causing the problem.
Right. Well, what happens to the bile when you take the gallbladder? What's the liver doing with the bile?
So the liver will still make bile. It's just going to be a constant drip, like a leaky faucet into your intestines.
Ugh, doesn't sound good.
No, it's not. Bile is a caustic substance. So I don't remember whether it's alkaline or acid, but it will definitely irritate your intestines for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
So technically you don't need your gallbladder for life, but you do need it for optimal digestion.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So people who've had their gallbladders removed who come to see me, we always have to give them a bile replacement that they take to kind of like boost bile with each meal. So that's pretty much your gallbladder in a bottle. And unfortunately, the unfortunate reality is once you've had your gallbladder removed, you pretty much have to replace bile function for the rest of your life.
Right, because it's not there. You don't have like your bile reserve ready to go. Okay.
Yeah. What your gallbladder does, like I said, is it allows this bile to rush in and infiltrate all the tiny little pieces of your food to do digestion of any fatty acids, like seek and destroy. Another word picture for you.
Yeah.
I imagine having like a cylinder that's filled with sand and silt and rocks and bigger rocks and bigger rocks, and it's completely full to the top of rocks. Is that container full?
There's space in between.
Yes.
The bigger pieces.
Yes, exactly. There's space in between. Bile should be like dumping water on top of that, infiltrating all those teeny tiny spaces. Bile should be very thin and free flowing so that it can access all of those aspects and digest any dietary fats.
Right, okay.
If you have congested bile, thick bile, that's not going to happen. Now, let me tell you what that means. So if we have a history of eating a low-fat diet, if we do not eat enough healthy fats, or if we eat processed fats, hydrogenated oils, a soybean oil, canola oil, those types of trans fats, those really, really shelf-stable oils, Crisco is a really good example, then your bile would become thick and sludgy. Like peanut butter or molasses, not like water.
Okay.
So you have that same cylinder of rocks and you just scoop some peanut butter on top. What's going to happen there?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. Like you're lucky if that little ring on the top gets digested.
Yeah, because the contact area is so small.
Because the contact area is so small. Now, sometimes bile gets really, really thick and it is almost impossible to get out of the gallbladder. And a lot of people then experience gallbladder attacks. pain, horrible, terrible, debilitating, double you over pain because bile cannot be squashed out of your gallbladder.
Oh, because it's like peanut butter.
Because it's thick.
Interesting.
Yeah, not like water. Water's easy to pass through a little hole. Peanut butter's not. Or toothpaste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it gets all sludgy and gross.
Gets all sludgy and gross. So then you have compromised fat digestion. Before you even get to the point of having gallbladder attacks, you can have thicker bile that's not quite as thin as water. And you might feel a little nauseous after you eat fats. You might feel a little bit bad after you eat certain types of protein that have fats with it. So like a steak, for example, has a good amount of protein mixed in with it. So you will think to yourself, oh, well, that was too heavy for me. I got to take it easy. Maybe I should go low fat. Maybe I don't need that. This whole fat yogurt was way too much. I didn't feel so good afterwards. Definitely felt nauseous. A lot of times nausea like that is related to poor fat digestion. You can't get that bile out to do digestion. So it's just sitting there in your intestines.
Right. Okay.
Which doesn't feel good. Right? So we want to have really thin, free-flowing bile to do good digestion. Some simple tips for you to be able to help your body produce healthy bile is actually to eat more healthy fats. Because bile, while the river of toxins, junk gets thrown into it, is made up primarily from fatty acids.
Okay.
So you have healthy fats turn into bile. Bile helps you digest your healthy fats, which turns into bile and goes around and around and around in a wonderful vicious cycle. So eating more healthy fats can help you to thin your bile. Eating things like beets, actually, beets are really, really rich in a substance called choline, and choline is great to help your body to create thinner bile.
Yeah. What does the that one supplement phosphatidylcholine, does that have something to do with bile?
It's similar. Yep.
Okay.
It's definitely, the phosphatidylcholine that you take is to help thin thick bile.
Interesting.
Breaks it down. Yep.
Neato.
Very neato. So vitamin C can be helpful too. So I tell people if you eat beets, sprinkle a little bit, just like squeeze a little bit of lemon juice on top, and that can be great. Red bell pepper actually, I believe, is the highest food-based form of vitamin C.
Interesting. Did not know that.
Yep, even more than oranges. People think of oranges
Right,
because the marketing company has done such a great job of saying rich in vitamin C, but red bell peppers, as opposed to even green and yellow and whatever, are the highest concentration of vitamin C.
Because you always associate vitamin C with orange.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now other things have vitamin C, but if you want, I would say just make a lovely beet salad with some roasted red bell pepper on top. Like, how delicious would that be?
Okay, so now the food slurry is we're in the lower intestine, right? Or small
No,
intestine.
we are in the very top of the small intestines, the duodenum.
Got
So
it.
now that all of these wonderful chemical processes are happening, and ideally happening effectively, correctly, no hindrances all the way down, your food paste gets to move on through the small intestines. So your small intestines are actually really, really long, and they're used to absorb nutrients. In the small intestines, you have these little tiny, all on the inside lining of the intestines, little tiny protrusions like fingers, which are called villi. And then on the ends of those fingers, you have microvilli, which are other little like hairs almost. And at the ends of those, that's where you pull in nutrients. So your nutrients have to be broken down really, really tiny to go right inside the body.
Okay.
Also, a fun fact that you might find interesting, food is still technically outside of your body.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were going to say that.
Until you absorb it in the small intestines. I know we talked about that in a previous show, but I think that is so wild.
Well, it's like all of digestion occurs outside of the body. Isn't that true?
Something
like that?
All of those components, technically, they're inside of you, but they're not a part of you yet. So when you absorb and assimilate those nutrients into the bloodstream, now they're inside your body.
Gotcha.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So we absorb, we move things along, and your body's doing what it's supposed to do when you have happy intestines. And you actually also have a lot of your immune system in your intestines too. There are these wonderful patches of lymph tissue called Peyer's patches, and these are responsible for a huge amount of the immune function of the body. So anyone who comes to me who says I've got chronic sinus problems, sinus infections or sneezing or whatever, small intestines. We fix their small intestines right up just by focusing on digestion, and boom, their chronic sinus problems just almost disappear.
Pretty sweet.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
No antibiotics needed. No Allegra D needed.
Yeah, right?
Yes. So, what else do I have to say about the small intestines? I think that's about all that you need to know. Food moves along.
It goes through the small intestines. It's getting absorbed by the villi and
the microvilli.
Microvilli, and then I would assume it's going to go into the large intestines.
Moves into the large intestines. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. In the small intestines, if your food is not broken down properly by not being chewed well, not having enough acid to do more digestion, not having the rest of those components from the liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas, you can have food particles that are too big trying to be absorbed into the bloodstream. And when that happens, you can have little tiny microabrasions, little tears in the intestines, in those villi, microvilli, and food particles that are not properly digested can be put into the bloodstream. Right? And that's a big problem. That's a really big problem. That is, if anyone's ever heard the term leaky gut, technically called small intestinal hyperpermeability, food particles get absorbed that should not have been absorbed. And then your body goes, oh crap, I don't know what that is. Is this an amino acid from a piece of chicken or is that a virus? Let's just attack it.
Right. And then, because then if you get a big enough hole, then what's in your gut can leak into your body. And then I know just from like military stuff, if you get gut shot, you can go septic because there's a hole blasted through your intestines. And then all that stuff's leaking into the rest of your body, which it should not. It should be staying outside of the body.
Right.
So.
Exactly. And I'm not talking about anything near that large.
Right.
I'm talking about teeny tiny little pinprick holes.
Say an extreme example.
Yeah.
Is going septic from getting shot.
Yeah. Not good. We don't want that.
Yeah.
So that's something to be aware of. A lot of people who have food sensitivities or intolerances, if we can repair that lining of the small intestines and kind of plug up those holes, a lot of times those food sensitivities completely go away. I can't tell you how many people who come to me with lactose intolerance specifically, some other things that lactose intolerance specifically, that we help to repair. We call it seal and heal the gut. And then they can eat those foods with no problem.
I was technically lactose intolerant back in the day.
Yep.
So they put me on some sort of medication. I was in 2nd grade. Wow. And I was also eating like an asshole.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me.
Yeah, probably not chewing, probably running around like a kid
it was
would.
like Pop-Tarts and Eggos.
Yeah.
That's,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And then like ice cream and not good dairy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, okay, while we're talking about eating foods like this, I do want to make a note on gluten because gluten is a really hot topic right now while we're talking about the small intestines. Gluten-free this, gluten-free that. Some people have actual allergies to gluten. Gluten is the primary protein found in wheat and some other grains. And in order to have a true allergy, that is your body reacting to a protein. You can have sensitivities to foods that don't have protein, like pears. Like I used to always say I'm allergic to pears, but pears don't have any protein, so I had a sensitivity to a pear.
Okay.
But the interesting thing is the reaction looks exactly the same. So it's the same in concept, but and technically they're different things. So the protein gluten can cause a lot of stress for people. And some people say, well, I don't have a gluten allergy, but I feel way better when I remove gluten from my diet. And a lot of times it's because they've got some of this digestive malfunction compromise happening in the small intestines. Now, gluten, regardless of whether or not you have an allergy to it, causes an interesting reaction in the small intestines. So the site of nutrient absorption at the ends of your villi and microvilli in the presence of gluten will spasm. Open and close, open and close, open and close, really fast. Just as a natural byproduct of gluten itself. So it can be irritating, and you can, if you have any sort of digestive compromise, hyperpermeability, you can allow food particles to move into your system that should not be moving into your bloodstream and have similar digestive distress sort of symptoms and even just allergy symptoms. You might not even think that it's a real food related thing like sniffles or sneezing, right? Like I told you, you've all heard me talk about sneezing when I drink my heavy cream in my coffee.
Yeah. Something
like that's going on. So a lot of people who remove gluten feel better just because they're not triggering that little spastic reaction.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then what's also interesting is that the newer strains and the heavily modified strains of wheat, and then subsequently the bread made from it that's highly processed, like Wonder Bread or, pick a brand that you would see in the grocery store, have way more gluten in them than they used to, which is why if you do what we're probably going to be doing at some point in the future, which is burr milling heirloom grain, which is grain that was closer to the original strains of grain that was grown, hundreds of years ago.
Not heavily glutenized.
And then you ferment that in which people would know as sourdough, and you make sourdough bread, then you do that through what's called a mother and then a starter, and it's fermented dough and all this stuff. It actually, the fermentation process breaks the gluten down even more, so the gluten is way different than what you would get in like a typical pizza dough or store-bought bread or, pick a pastry, whatever.
Right.
So you're getting the best quality wheat that actually has nutrients still in it because of the burr milling and all of that. We don't need to go all the way down that, but I'm just saying, like, not all breads are created equal.
It makes a difference.
And I think one of the reasons that people are having such sensitivities to things nowadays is because of how heavily processed and how completely lacking in nutrients the processing makes the food.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that is a huge factor on top of, so your body, if you have any of these digestive compromises that we've talked about and you're only eating heavily processed foods, it's such nutrient poor food that the little tiny bit your body can absorb is nowhere near what it needs to thrive, barely survive, and that's why we've got all these people who have these major modern degenerative diseases that have developed seemingly out of nowhere, but it's because you've had this long string of compromise for so long, right? People often have these digestive symptoms for a really long time before it becomes anything, and they just don't know what to do about it, or they take something to stop the symptom. Right.
You're just masking it.
You're just masking it. I like to talk about symptoms as being little red flags that your body's waving, right? We'll go back to heartburn. If you have heartburn, your body is sending you a big red flag. Help me out. I need some more acid in the stomach to do digestion. Well, when you give Tums, when you take Zantac, when you do those things, you've taken away the red flag, but the problem is still there. You just can't see it. Right? So our culture is so used to just solve the symptom and the problem's gone, but that's not true. You have to go back and repair the function. So bloating, diarrhea, people just take Imodium, just, whatever. And that is masking the symptom, taking away the red flag, but it's not solving the problem.
Gotcha. All right. So where's the food in the journey right now?
We're still in the small intestines.
Okay.
Food's being absorbed nicely, easily, really lovely. If you have any pathogens, you've neutralized them with stomach acid. Any other pathogens are neutralized by your Peyer's patches in the small intestines. So you can kind of move things along into the large intestines. So we move food from the small intestines into the large intestines through the ileocecal valve, the IC valve. This is a very interesting valve because it oftentimes gets jammed up with junk. If things are poorly digested up north, then it's like causes a really huge traffic jam in this IC valve. We often say in the nutrition world, we say that's where the yeasties and the beasties hang out. So a lot of things like yeast and overgrown bacteria and even parasites get stuck right in that area, which is on your lower right quadrant of your abdomen, that you can have pain. You can have a lot of problem that happens with the IC valve being irritated. If food is properly digested and moving through smoothly, you don't have that problem, right?
Yep.
So then we move into the large intestines, and I love talking about the large intestines. I love talking about all of this, but the large intestines are the home of your gut microbiome. This is where most of the bacteria in your gut live. So the large intestines, also known as the colon, is much, much shorter than your small intestines and kind of makes a little half box all the way around your abdomen.
Okay.
Goes up from your right hip all the way up to your rib cage, down across to the left-hand side, and then down to your left hip. This is the home, like I said, of your gut microbiome. So if you've ever heard of probiotics, gut flora, gut bacteria, all that is in your large intestines. Now, you might know this, but you might not know this. How many pounds of bacteria do you think the average person is walking around with every day? One person, how many pounds in the gut?
How many pounds?
Pounds.
See, I know it's got to be some sort of outlandish number. I'm going to say, how heavy is this person?
Just the average person.
So like hypothetically.
170 pounds.
170 pounds, so they're a male. Say 10 pounds.
8 pounds.
8 pounds. All right, that's close.
8 pounds.
Pretty close.
Yeah, 8 pounds. Like imagine holding a 5-pound bag of flour or a 5-pound bag of sugar. More than that of bacteria in your gut. And it's awesome because those bacteria, and it's not just bacteria. I say that generally as my broad strokes, but it's fungus, it's yeast, it's viruses. Some of these things, when they're in there in the proper quantities, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful ecosystem that keeps us stabilized. Mm-hmm. Right? So average person walking around 8 pounds of gut bacteria, more microbes in one gut than there are beings on the planet, including bugs.
Yeah.
Right? Crazy. This whole ecosystem that's really in delicate balance. And that's where it's always so, you have this really big stress response when you think about taking antibiotics because you don't really know. We don't really know what we're doing to that ecosystem when we take antibiotics.
Definitely disrupting it.
We're definitely disrupting it. So a lot of people have diarrhea or tons of bowel movements, all kinds of issues when they take antibiotics because you're just wiping out populations of this gut flora.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully now there's a lot of research coming around with probiotics to help repair that, replenish that.
Yeah. And that's what I've heard a lot of guys do, particularly in the fighting community. Like staph infection's really big.
yeah.
And if you get a staph infection, they just light you up with antibiotics, which kills everything.
Yep.
It's very indiscriminate. But then what a lot of fighters do is they go on a lot of heavy probiotics and kombucha and like a lot of stuff to like start to repopulate that whole scenario.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the foods in the
Large intestines.
large intestine.
We're now interacting with whatever your body has not already absorbed in the small intestine. So most of what you're going to be passing through into the large intestines are things your body does not need, or insoluble fibers,
So
right?
poo.
No, not poo yet.
Not poo yet?
No, it's
All right.
still into the fiber mode. So we've got all kinds of other things happening.
It's still considered chyme, or is it something
No,
else?
chyme, it's just food paste.
Food
I don't know
paste.
I actually don't know what it's called once chyme has been neutralized. Chyme is the acidified food paste. It's called bolus before that, then chyme, and I don't know what it's called after chyme.
Okay, so it's
Neutralized chyme.
pre-poo.
Pre-poo. So we'll call it that for now. So all of those things that you didn't absorb, a lot of them go to feed that gut flora.
Okay.
Right? So a lot of fibers, those microbes will eat those fibers. And different types of microbes will prefer different types of fibers and different types of sugars. So let's talk for a moment about our macronutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Proteins mostly get absorbed. Fats mostly get absorbed, and carbohydrates often don't get very much absorbed, right? You talk about whole grains, you talk about fiber, because it's supposed to help you have a nice bulking agent to have a good bowel movement. Those fibers are what feed your gut flora. Not exclusively, but on the whole. So carbohydrate is any fruit, any vegetable, and any grain or grain-based product, as well as any sweetener from a biochemical perspective. We often don't think of that. We think of carbs, we think of bread, pasta, crackers, cakes, candies,
Right.
pretzels, these types of things. But any fruit and any vegetable also counts as a carbohydrate. So those types of things will feed your gut flora. You often hear people say, eat your vegetables. Vegetables are good for you. Well, vegetable type matter feeds a lot of the good guys in your gut. Now, there has been a trend to talk about the good bacteria versus the bad bacteria, but I don't like that. I think we don't know enough about the gut to make a distinction, good guys versus bad guys. So I like to think about it as the gut flora and then our opportunistic microbes that are going to flourish if the setting is right for them to flourish. And that is often more of the pathogenic type of microbes.
Gotcha.
But we do need them. We do need some. So people think often candida, right? If you have a candida infection or yeast infections, you want to get rid of it completely, but you actually don't want to get rid of it completely. Our bodies need a little bit of that to stay in balance. So these microbes do a whole heck of a lot for us that we don't even know they're doing every day. When our microbes eat the stuff that we can't even absorb, they create other nutrients for us, things like butyric acid. And this is also where you get a lot of your B12 kind of things being created, byproducts of this animal process.
Okay.
But you also have microbes that create neurotransmitters.
Interesting.
Yeah, and these neurotransmitters go to make us not feel anxious, not feel depressed, all of these mood imbalances. A lot of people have huge mood imbalances. I work with so many people who come in and I'm anxious and depressed all the time and I don't know why. And it's not like, I have a counseling background, trauma history background, like it's not from any major traumatic event. It's general. There's no real reason for them to feel this terrible all the time, except for the fact that their gut flora does not know how to make the proper nutrients for them. Right? So a lot of people, we just fix this north to south gut process and the anxiety and depression just melts away almost completely because their body now knows what to do with what it's been given.
Right. So food's moving on down south. The pre-poo is floating its way down the digestive river.
Yeah. So in the large intestines, that's pretty much what happens. And then whatever your body does not need, and recycling also happens in the large intestines. You recycle saliva, you recycle water, you recycle digestive enzymes, these types of things. You put them back on the shelf for use next time so that you don't have to recreate it at every single meal. That would take a lot of energy to do that. So then whatever your body does not need, absorb, create for you, ends up in your toilet bowl.
Okay.
And that's how digestion is supposed to work.
And so the large intestine is then where's like the colons at the end, right?
Yes, technically the large intestine is also called the colon, and the very last part of your large intestine is called your sigmoid colon.
Okay.
So you've got your ascending colon, your transverse colon, your descending colon, and the sigmoid colon at the bottom.
And that's what you talked about,
That's
it
what I
going
talked
like
about,
this.
going like
Okay.
that. Yep.
So it's going from that one hip
the
over.
ascending from the right hip up, transverse from the right side to the left side, descending from left side down to the left hip area-ish.
Okay.
And then the sigmoid colon goes from there to your anus.
Okay. And then the process by which I'd assume the small intestine and the large intestine are doing like some sort of like muscle contraction to like squeeze it out, right?
Yep.
To like pass things along.
Yep.
Does it actually like contract?
It does.
Is that what
to
it's
move
doing?
things
Okay.
through. Yep. And that is called, what is that called? Now I'm drawing a blank here.
I got it. But
Yeah.
I don't know what the name is called, but I just wanted to, I'd assume that's
Peristalsis.
There you go.
Whoa, baby.
Nailed it.
Yeah, so
Nailed it.
peristalsis, that's the process of peristalsis. And that all's triggered when you have everything's lined up, north to south properly.
So I don't think this conversation would be complete without talking about what a proper shit looks like.
Okay.
So I feel like we should talk about that.
Sure.
Because what's funny is, so my mom was a nurse
Yes.
for 5 years in Center City, Philadelphia. So when she had back in the day some of her nursing friends over, now she kind of like retired or stopped doing that when she had my brother and I, but she would still have some of her nursing friends over for dinner, and they would start talking about stuff, and that would be like a table clearer.
Yeah.
So like I've been used to hearing medical things, and they talk about bowel movements all the time. So
Yeah.
when you came along, I was like, oh, this feels like home. All right. So
Yes.
anyway,
So we talked about this way at the beginning of the episode, that your poop actually tells you a lot about what's going on in your system. If you have really loose, not well-formed bowel movement, poop, that is just like gross and floating and almost like diarrhea. Well, diarrhea, first of all, if it's liquid, big problem. You've got definitely things are moving through you way too quickly. Very likely low stomach acid, very likely a lot of stress in the small intestines like we talked about. Anyway, so that's not a good option. Then you kind of move to a little bit more formed, kind of like PC, but very, very soft. If you flush it, it disintegrates completely. There's no wholeness to it whatsoever. Then you can have kind of like nuggets, where it's more formed, not exactly falling apart, but still very soft, and you kind of have clumps.
yeah.
Then we have a well-formed bowel movement. It's like a log, soft, easy, does not float. It sinks. Yes.
Poop torpedo.
Like a poop torpedo. Very easy to pass. An ideal bowel movement, if you have a really, really well-formed bowel movement, everything's going nicely, you should basically not even need TP.
Right.
No toilet paper
Right. Yeah,
necessary.
yeah.
Because your body, it has everything is just so well absorbed and packaged your, discarded material. Boop.
And it's
out.
fairly like dry.
Not dry.
Not dry, but like it's less liquidy.
Oh, yeah.
It's like very well formed.
Very
Yeah,
well
yeah.
formed. Yep. You shouldn't even have to think about it. If you spend more than 5 minutes having a poop, something's wrong. For sure.
Gotcha.
It should be very speedy, a very easy process. Sometimes people say to me, I don't have time to have bowel movements. I just wait. Because it takes them a half an hour. You know what I
don't
mean? There's a
have
lot of
time
straining.
to
There's a lot of
poop.
stress. But that's the reality of so many people.
Man,
Yeah.
that's a bummer.
It is a bummer. It sucks. So, back before I started my own health journey, I was thought it was completely normal to have one bowel movement a week.
Yeah, that's totally not cool.
Yeah, it's not. It's normal as in it's common, but it's not normal that your body should be having that as the norm.
Right.
They
right.
say you should have somewhere around one bowel movement every day for every meal you had the day before.
Interesting.
So if you had 3 meals yesterday, you have 3 bowel movements the next day.
Huh.
I will say that's what I've read. Literature says that, but I think there's a lot of variation on that too. At least one every day is the best that I've seen.
Yeah, I would say like 1 to 2 a day.
Yeah, 1 to 2 a day, you're awesome.
Is you're feeling
Well
pretty
formed
good.
torpedoes in and out real quick.
Yeah.
Then you can go beyond that though. So that's kind of our midline category. Then you go below that and you have harder chunks, kind of like the top chunks we talked about, the earlier chunks we talked about where was really soft, but this is going to be harder and not quite like rabbit pellets, but not well formed, right? It's kind of like they're a bunch of hard bits jammed together. Kind of like if you can imagine a log of like a popcorn ball, when they smash them together. So,
Yeah.
chocolate dip popcorn ball. That's what it would look like.
I love the word pictures for this.
Yeah, well, for people who are listening.
Yeah.
And then after that, you have the rabbit pellets, just hard balls or like
Yeah.
That's all of anything other than that middle torpedo section is telling you that you've got some digestive compromise. And we haven't even talked about corn poops or the green poops or any of those things that are big indicators that something's not working as well as we want it to be.
Gotcha.
Right.
Well, and then what, not to get too graphic here, but well, you mentioned color. What color should it be?
A nice brown.
A nice brown.
Nice soft brown, not dark brown.
Okay.
Not light. If it's too light, that actually is an indicator of gallbladder problems.
Okay.
Like clay colored, not a good color. You want it to be a nice brown color, even toned. So if you have not done it, take a peek at your poop.
If your poo was chocolate, what type of chocolate would it be? Like a milk chocolate? Or are we talking like dark chocolate?
No, somewhere between milk and dark.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
like Snickers bar level?
I'm not exactly familiar with what color that would be. To be totally frank with you. Kind of like that thing hanging behind your head. My wooden thing over there, which you can see on YouTube.
Well, from a painter's perspective, I'd call that a nice deep walnut or chestnut color.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That
Okay,
should be
so
nice.
perfect digestive scenario.
Yeah.
You cook your meal. You're having lots of fragrant aromas coming from the pans and dishes you're preparing. That scent hits your olfactory schnoz, and your brain's like, oh shit, I'm gonna eat. So it starts creating some saliva, send a signal to your stomach to be like, yo, start prepping some stomach acid. Things are about to get real.
Yeah.
Now you prepare your food, you set it in a nice place, and then maybe you're eating with a friend or family member. You start eating, you properly masticate each bite of food.
First, you sit down
Okay.
and you take some deep breaths.
Ah.
That's a lot of people who have traditions of saying a prayer or grace or something like that is awesome before the meal because it helps you to be in a really restful mode.
I find it's also nice to pause. 'Cause you and I cook a lot for a lot of our friends, just to take a, even if you're not religiously
Right.
affiliated, to just take a minute to be grateful. It slows down because we try and get everything on the table when it's hot and you
Yeah.
want everyone to like dig in, but just to like take a second, particularly for the people preparing the food, to chill out, enter that chill parasympathetic mode.
Yes.
And now we're ready to masticate.
Yes.
So we're going to cut up our foods,
It's nice small bites.
small bites, eat them properly, chew it 20
Set
to
your
30
fork down
times.
between bites if you need
Pause. Now you've got, the saliva, evenly coating your stuff, your all
Evenly
your
mixed.
your food, properly
to.
masticated.
You've tasted. Your brain has a thorough understanding of the nutrients involved in the food. Your stomach knows the chemical components it needs to sort of secrete so that it can digest that food for you.
And then it travels down your esophagus through what's up?
I was going to tell you, but it looks like you want to guess.
I want to, because it's the, what?
Cardiac sphincter.
Cardiac sphincter. I want to say pyloric valve, but I knew that's the other one.
Yeah.
So cardiac sphincter, which is more of a flap than a sphincter.
Yeah.
And then it goes into your stomach, which has been properly notified
Yep.
of what's coming down the pike. So it's got the adequate amount of acid to digest what you're throwing in there. It starts breaking down
Yep.
all of your
The
food.
churn and burn.
And so it's going to be very acidic, and it's going to then generate enough acid to make chyme.
Yes.
But it's bolus before?
It's called bolus when you chew it
When
and
you chew
swallow
it.
it, and
Okay.
then it becomes chyme.
Okay. So then now it has been neutralized to
No.
in the stomach.
It's acidic in the stomach.
But that's the process of the stomach doing it, is getting it to a
Be
more
acidic, not neutral. Neutral's in the small intestines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so go on.
So then, but wouldn't the pH be dropping though?
Yeah, it'd be dropping, and dropping means more acidic.
More acidic.
Neutral is a 7, so we want to drop down to 1.5 to 3.
Okay.
So you're dropping acidic, so
Well,
you're becoming more acidic.
So what's the pH of the food once it goes through the pyloric valve? What's the pH of the food?
Now, the pyloric valve is at the bottom of the stomach. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Like
Oh, yeah.
the process of
1.5 to 3.
okay. And so then once your food is properly digested in this vat of acid, then the pyloric valve opens.
Yes.
That's Gandalf.
Yes.
So you can, you shall pass.
Yep.
And then it goes through to the small intestines.
Yep. The duodenum.
Duodenum. And so now it's chilling in there.
Yep.
And it's getting absorbed in the
Then the two things get involved.
bile,
And
the gallbladder, and
starts with a P.
pancreas?
Yes.
Okay. And then the pancreas is releasing other enzymes to help
Yep.
digest, right?
And the neutralizing agent.
Okay, that's where it gets neutralized. Okay. So the pancreas gets involved, and your bile gets
Liver,
involved.
gallbladder, yep.
Get involved, or a little bit later, where it's going to.
It's all the same right
all
there.
the same
Yep.
time. Okay, so they come through the gate of the
Yes.
pyloric valve, then they get hit with the enzymes from the pancreas,
And the neutralizing agent.
from the bile. So then that's where the
And you
acid,
digest your fats.
and that's where the acidity drops.
Correct. And that's
it's-
where it becomes neutral.
And it's dropping. It's going up to neutral at like 7 or 7.2 right
Yeah,
in there.
so the acidity technically rises, not drops.
rises,
Yeah, so it's-
whatever you want to say.
Yeah,
that.
but
yeah.
you go up on the pH scale to neutral.
You're going towards alkaline.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
You got it.
And then so now it's going to be moving through the small intestine in this more neutral state.
Mm-hmm.
So the neutralization starts at the top of the small intestine,
in
like
the duodenum.
early on in
Correct.
that. Okay. So as soon as it enters, it gets neutralized. Then it starts moving down, and the villi and the microvilli start pulling out all the
Yes,
nutrients.
You're doing great.
It continues south.
Yes.
And then it gets to the valve between the small intestine
Yes.
and the large intestine, which is called the what?
I see.
What's the technical term for that?
Ileocecal valve.
Ileocecal valve.
The ileum is the bottom of the small intestines, and the cecum is the top of the large intestines.
Okay.
Ileocecal valve.
And that's where a lot of the yeasties and beasties can hang out.
Yes.
And I know that if you get an overgrowth of bacteria, that it can grow through,
through,
which
yes.
is a big problem.
Because that valve can get stuck open, and that's where you get
What's that called?
SIBO.
SIBO. That's
Small
what
intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Right, and that's bad news bears. Okay, but in this scenario, things are going
Yeah.
well. So
No SIBO.
it
No
goes,
IC valve
it goes
congestion.
through the IC, and then it travels around your large intestine, which is gonna then feed your microbiome in your gut. Which, side note, I did not know that was where most of the microbiome.
Yeah.
So I definitely learned that. I kind of thought it was in your stomach, but that.
Yeah. No,
What's weird is
nothing
like,
really lives in the stomach.
because some people talk about the stomach, but they're actually talking about the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine,
Yeah.
all in the same thing. But it's not. That's not.
Yeah, they're
necessar-
just, I think, making generalities,
Right,
not
right,
just
right.
like being specific.
So this situation's traveling around,
Mm-hmm.
and it's feeding your, all the microbiome and bacteria and awesome, which
Mm-hmm. Your gut flora. That's
gut
what I usually
flora,
say.
and you've got about 8 pounds of that sitting around.
Cool, right?
And then as it's, then it goes through your colon, which is also so colon and large intestine are the same thing.
Typically used interchangeably, yes.
Okay, and then
Technically, I believe the sigmoid colon is the only part that's really the colon, but people generally talk about the colon and the large intestine interchangeably.
okay, and the sigmoid colon is the one closest to your butthole.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
connected to your anus.
Sweet. So, so then the food which once masticated is bolus, and then that's sitting in the stomach. That goes through the small intestine, becomes chyme, and then is something else as it travels through.
In
And
the
the large
stomach, it
intestine-
becomes chyme.
Let's just say when it hits the large intestines, it's now shit.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
So it goes around the large intestine, and then you
I liked pre-poo. I liked that was better.
pre-poo. Yeah. So pre-poo, and then you feel like you need to, have
Evacuate.
some sort of spiritual movement. A BM. That's what my I heard that term from my grandparents.
A spiritual movement?
What they called it, because a BM is a bowel movement.
Yeah, we
It's
say
like-
BM all the time.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, then you pop a squat and drop a deuce,
Yep.
and then hopefully it is a walnut / dark chestnut color, a piece of shite that comes out of you like a torpedo, and sinks to the bottom of your toilet bowl. You flush it, and it
Doesn't
should
leave any skid marks.
it should take you, but a moment.
but a moment.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And that's how digestion should
And
work
that's how
from north to south, according to Jeremy. Perfect. That was a great summary. I've never heard you summarize that before.
I thought I
That's
nailed
awesome.
it. That's pretty
That was
close.
pretty good.
Yeah,
It's pretty good. That's awesome. Yeah.
that was fun. That was a very entertaining. I think we covered it. That was a very comprehensive digestive overview.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to add on the tail of that?
I do want to add one little thing.
Okay.
If anyone listening here is struggling with some kind of heartburn or indigestion or bloating, there are some things you can do at home, but there are other things it's better to consult somebody about, just because it's easier to work with someone who can monitor steps without causing more harm. I know some people jump into things they read. There's this really great book, I'll link it for you guys in the show notes, called Why Stomach Acid is Good for You by Dr. Jonathan Wright. And it's a great summary. It's a little tiny book. You can get it for like $5 on Amazon. My copy's red. I don't know if the new one's red or not, but It is a great way to walk you through repairing some of this digestive dysfunction kind of at home. But he uses, and it's most common for people to repair hydrochloric acid deficiency, digestive acid deficiency, with a hydrochloric acid supplement. That's great. We've taken it. It's nice. But you need to be well monitored, because if you've had digestive malfunction for a long time, you might have worn away that protective lining in your stomach, and you don't want to give yourself an ulcer.
Right.
That can happen. People have done that. So I just take caution, be careful with yourself. If you do have any of those symptoms, heartburn, all these things we just talked about, the very best thing I can say to do is be calm, sit down, chew your food really, really well, enjoy your food. Stay seated for 10 minutes after your meal's done, if at all possible. Just stay in that relaxed digest mode. And you can also, before you eat your meal, you can drink something like apple cider vinegar in water, 1 or 2 tablespoons or 1 or 2 teaspoons even, in maybe 4 to 6 ounces of water. And what that does is it actually helps to stimulate your body's own production of hydrochloric acid, digestive juices, or lemon juice. So apple cider vinegar or lemon juice in water, or kombucha. We haven't really talked about anything like that, but kombucha is a great way to help stimulate good hydrochloric acid production.
Gotcha.
And there are some great products out there called digestive bitters. My favorite company is called Urban Moonshine. And they have some really nice digestive bitters. Whenever we taste a bitter taste, that actually tells our stomach, get ready to produce acid.
Ah.
Yeah. So you put a little spray, 1 or 2 drops on your tongue. You don't need a lot of it. And it helps you to stimulate your own hydrochloric acid. It's a great place to get started if you're having any of these symptoms. Sometimes that solves the problem. I had a client once who I only saw him 2 or 3 times. He came to see me, terrible abdominal cramping, terrible bloating, felt awful every time he ate food, to the point where he's like, I'm just tired of eating food. I feel miserable every time. So I worked with him 2 or 3 visits. All I did was tell him, sit down, take 5 deep breaths, 7 seconds to breathe in, 7 seconds to breathe out. Chew your food 20 to 30 times every single bite. Stay seated for 10 minutes after your meal. And you know what? 6 weeks, less than that, 3 weeks, all of his symptoms were completely gone, totally solved, because your body wants to help you. Mm-hmm. If you can set it up for success, you give your body the tools that it needs to do the job you're asking it to do, be in a parasympathetic state so you can do digestion, it's going to do it. It knows how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's super awesome.
It's pretty sweet, man.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a lot of problems, maybe just give Serina a call.
Maybe give me a call. I'll be happy to help.
Also linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. It was fun.
It was very enlightening. I learned a lot.
Cool.
So that was awesome. That was I think we nailed that one.
Yeah.
That was good.
All right.
All right, guys. See you in the outro.
And that is it for us, folks. Thank you so much for listening or watching on YouTube and participating with our show today. Episode 18 in the bag. We did it. So again, thank you so much for watching. We really hope that you learned something about digestion, even if you just take away the fact that it's really important to sit down when you eat your food. That's awesome. You can reach us, look for our show notes on our website or any of our platforms that you're listening to this from your podcast. Our website is thepainterandthepixie.com. You can follow us on Instagram for fun show updates at The Painter and the Pixie. And if you have been putting into practice some of the suggestions that I gave here during the show to help yourself with digestion, but you're still kind of hitting a wall, or even if you say, hey, I just want to talk to Serina about some of these things that she said or the things I'm experiencing, please give me a call. I have a website. It is www.wisebearfn.com. That's wisebear, F as in functional, N as in nutrition.com. And you can reach me by email as well. And we'll link all of that stuff in our show notes so you can give me a chat. I'm super happy to help.
And she, as you probably have figured out by now, Serina really knows what she's doing. She has helped many of folk kind of work through this process and has solved some of the craziest things that I have heard about just through addressing their digestion and blood sugar regulation. So she is a straight up wizard. That's why she is the Pixie. Has some magical abilities when it comes to helping y'all have a most pleasant shit. So
hey, happy digestion is magical.
It is.
It really is.
It makes a big difference.
It's a world of difference.
Yeah.
So many seemingly completely, overwhelming conditions people have. If we just fix the digestive system and make sure that north to south process is working the way that it should, they're a new person. It's true for me.
Awesome stuff. True for me as well.
Yep.
So All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for watching or listening, and we super appreciate it. That was a really good episode.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that one. I actually did learn a lot. I know a lot of people say that, but I actually did. I hadn't heard that in a while, so it was good.
Awesome.
So
That's my goal, man.
anyway, y'all have a most pleasant week. I hope your poops are good and well formed.
Yes. Do you chew your food well? Enjoy. Savor the moment.
All of those things. All right, guys. We will see you next week.
Bye.
See ya.
Amazing.